An endless line of men walked slowly through the Balkan mountains, advancing in a macabre procession. Anyone observing from afar would see a disconcerting sight. Hundreds of soldiers organized in groups of 100, each group led by a single man who, unlike his comrades, still retained sight in one of his eyes. The remaining 14,000 warriors had been brutally blinded, their eyes gouged out or pierced by order of the Byzantine Emperor Basil the Third. From a distance, they could be mistaken for a marching troop, but upon closer inspection, the horror of the scene was revealed. Men stumbling, clutching each other's shoulders, dried blood and gaping wounds where eyes had once been, groans of pain echoing through the valleys. These Bulgarian soldiers had been captured at the Battle of Kleidion in the summer of 2014 and were being sent home not as ordinary prisoners or as part of a diplomatic exchange, but as a living message of terror, a demonstration of the power of Byzantium and the calculated cruelty of its emperor. At the head of this column of blind men marched Byzantine knights, not to protect the prisoners but to ensure they reached their final destination. The camp of Tsar Samuel of Bulgaria, the man who had defied the Byzantine Empire for decades. When the Emperor of Bulgaria, Tsar Samuel, saw his troops arriving in this state, thousands of men mutilated, their faces disfigured by Byzantine cruelty, he could not bear the shock. It is said that his legs buckled, his vision went dark, and he fell to the ground, the victim of a sudden heart attack. Within 2 days, on October 6, 2014, Samuel was dead, defeated not by a sword in combat, but by the horror of the sight of his own soldiers, transformed into a walking monument to their enemies' brutality. Basil, the Byzantine emperor who ordered this atrocity, would forever earn the epithet Vulgarochthons, the Bulgar-Slayer. This is the story of the conflict between two of the most remarkable rulers of the Middle Ages, Samuel of Bulgaria, the last great Tsar of the First Bulgarian Empire, and Basil I of Byzantium, perhaps the most ruthless of the Byzantine emperors. A story of ambition, resilience, calculated cruelty, and finally an act so barbaric that it shocked even the chroniclers of an age inured to violence. But to understand how we got to this point, we need to go back to the beginning. The end of the 10th century was a period of profound transformations in Eastern Europe. The Byzantine Empire, Rome's heir in the East, was experiencing a period of military and cultural renaissance. After centuries of decline, Byzantium was beginning to recover lost territories and reassert its influence. To the north, in the Balkans, the First Bulgarian Empire had emerged as Constantinople's main rival. Founded in the 6th century by Bulgar tribes migrating from Central Asia, this state had transformed into a formidable power, combining Slavic and Bulgar elements, adopting Orthodox Christianity, and developing a unique culture. Samuel was born around 543 into a noble Bulgarian family. He was the youngest of 4 brothers, sons of Count Nicholas, an important aristocrat from the Sofia region. His mother, Ripsime, was of Armenian origin, bringing connections to the Christian East to the family. Little is known about Samuel's childhood, but it is certain that he grew up during a period of relative peace between Byzantium and Bulgaria. This peace, however, was fragile, maintained through a delicate balance of power and marital alliances. The situation began to change dramatically starting in 969. The then Bulgarian Emperor Peter the Fair, who had maintained peace with Byzantium for decades, abdicated following an invasion by Kievan Rus. His son and heir Boris II was sent to Constantinople as a hostage, symbolizing Bulgaria's formal submission to Byzantium. Shortly thereafter, in 971, the Byzantine Emperor John Timosis conquered the Bulgarian capital Preslav and declared the end of the Bulgarian Empire, formally annexing its eastern territories. It was in this context of national crisis that Samuel and his three brothers, David, Moses, and Aaron, emerged as leaders of the Bulgarian resistance. The four brothers, collectively known as the Comeatopoli, sons of the Count, began a rebellion in the western regions of Bulgaria, where Byzantine influence was weakest. Each brother controlled a different region, forming a kind of shared government. Samuel, the youngest, proved to be the most militarily skilled, commanding the Bulgarian forces from the fortress of Kleidion in the far northwest of the country. The death of Emperor John Simisis in 976 created an opportunity for the Bulgarians. The Comeatopoli launched a general offensive against the Byzantine forces, quickly recovering lost territories. However, the shared leadership was short-lived. David was killed by Balak bandits in the mountains, while Moses died during the siege of the city of Ceres. The third brother, Aaron, apparently conspired with the Byzantines and was executed on Samuel's orders in 976 along with his family. Only one nephew, Ivan Vladislav, was saved from execution thanks to the pleas of Samuel's son, Gabriel Radomir. Now, as sole leader of the Bulgarian resistance, Samuel faced a formidable adversary, the new Byzantine Emperor Basil I, who had assumed the throne in 976 at the age of just 18. Initially, Basil did not pose a serious threat. Inexperienced and internally challenged, the young emperor faced revolts from his own generals. This Byzantine instability allowed Samuel to consolidate his control over western Bulgaria and initiate expansionist campaigns. The first major clash between Samuel and Basil occurred in 986. The Byzantine emperor, wanting to put down the Bulgarian rebellion, personally led an expedition through the Kleidion mountains deep in the Bulgarian heartland. Samuel, demonstrating the military genius that would later characterize him, did not directly engage the superior Byzantine army. Instead, he set up an ambush. As Basil's forces retreated through Trajan's Pass, the Bulgarians attacked, inflicting a humiliating defeat on the Byzantines. Basil himself was nearly captured, narrowly escaping with a small group of guards. This victory brought enormous prestige to Samuel and strengthened his position. In 1997, he was officially crowned Tsar of Bulgaria, assuming all the titles and prerogatives of the previous dynasty. His coronation marked the formal rebirth of the Bulgarian Empire, which had been declared extinct just 26 years earlier. As emperor, Samuel moved the capital to Ohrid in the far west of his domains, where he built an impressive palace complex and fortified the city. The following years saw the maximum expansion of Bulgarian power under Samuel. Taking advantage of the instability in Byzantium and the civil wars that Basil II had to face, Samuel conquered vast territories. His forces advanced southward, taking parts of Greece, including Thessaly, and reaching as far as the Peloponnese. To the west, he subdued the Serbian Principality of Ducal and conducted campaigns against Croatia. To the east, he maintained constant pressure on Byzantine territories in Thrace. At the height of his power, around 1000, Samuel's empire stretched from the Adriatic Sea to the vicinity of Constantinople, controlling much of the Balkans. Samuel was not only a military genius but also a skilled administrator and diplomat. He built alliances through strategic marriages. His daughter Miroslava married the Byzantine nobleman Ashot, whom Samuel appointed governor of Dyrrachium, present-day Durrës in Albania. His son and heir Gabriel Radomir married the daughter of the Hungarian king, securing the northern border. Samuel also sought international legitimacy, possibly receiving his imperial crown from Pope Gregory V in a move that challenged the authority of Constantinople. However, the tide began to turn at the dawn of the new millennium. Basil I, after quelling internal revolts, turned his full attention to Bulgaria. The Byzantine emperor had matured, no longer the callous young man defeated at the hands of Trajan. He was now a determined, disciplined, and ruthless commander. Beginning in 1001, he began a methodical strategy of conquest, systematically attacking Bulgarian fortifications and recapturing city after city. Unlike previous campaigns, these were not mere raids, but ongoing operations of occupation and annexation. Samuel attempted to respond in kind. In 104, knowing that Basil was planning a major invasion through the Estremitsa River Valley, the Bulgarian Tsar ordered the construction of a large wooden barrier in the Clay Gorge, the Greek for key, blocking the Byzantines' path. It was a formidable defensive position protected by steep mountains on both sides and defended by a substantial Bulgarian force. When the Byzantine army arrived in July 2014, it found its path blocked. Day after day, Basil launched attacks against the wall only to see his soldiers repelled with heavy casualties. However, the Byzantine emperor did not give up. He sent one of his best generals, Nicephorus Chifius, to surround the Indoshi Mountains, Velasica, with a detachment of soldiers. On July 29th, while Basil maintained pressure on the front of the barrier, Chifius suddenly appeared behind the Bulgarian lines. Caught between two Byzantine armies, the Bulgarians were massacred. Contemporary accounts speak of 14,000 to 15,000 Bulgarian soldiers captured in that battle. Samuel's son, Gabriel Radomir, managed to escape and even kill an important Byzantine commander during his escape. Samuel also managed to escape, although he was already old and his health weakened by decades of campaigning. It was then that Basil II made the decision that would earn him the epithet Slayer of Bulgars. Instead of executing or enslaving the prisoners, as was common at the time, he ordered them all to be blinded, except for one man in each group of 100, who was spared one eye so he could guide his comrades back to their emperor. What motivated this act of calculated brutality? Some historians suggest it was revenge for the death of one of his favorite commanders. Others point out that from the Byzantine perspective, the Bulgarians were rebels against their legitimate authority, and blinding was the traditional punishment for rebels in the empire. Regardless of the motivation, the effect was devastating. The story of Samuel's shock at seeing his soldiers blinded, followed by his collapse and death 2 days later, comes primarily from Byzantine chroniclers, notably John Skylitzes, who wrote, "They say that the Emperor Basil mowed down the prisoners, about 15,000 in number, with orders that one man out of every 100 be left with one eye so that he could be their guide. He then sent them back to Samuel. When he saw them arriving in such numbers and in the state they were in, he lacked the moral strength to withstand the shock. Fainting and darkness fell over him and he collapsed to the ground. He suffered a heart attack. 2 days later, he died on October 6, 2014. Samuel's death marked the beginning of the end for the resurgent Bulgarian Empire. His son Gabriel Radomir assumed the throne, but reigned for less than a year before being assassinated by his cousin Ivan Vladislav. Ironically, the same man Samuel had saved from execution decades earlier. Even Vladislav attempted to continue the resistance against Byzantium but was killed in battle in 108 AD. Following his death, the widowed Empress Maria and many Bulgarian governors surrendered to Basil II. 4 years after Samuel's death, the First Bulgarian Empire officially came to an end. Basil II triumphantly entered Ohrid, the capital established by Samuel, and incorporated the Bulgarian territories into the Byzantine Empire as a new theme of Bulgaria, an administrative province with its capital at Skopje. The Bulgarian independence that Samuel had fought for decades to preserve was over. It would be more than 150 years until a second Bulgarian Empire emerged. The brutality committed by Basil II against Samuel's soldiers represents one of the darkest episodes in medieval Balkan history, even by the standards of a violent age. The mass blinding of 14,000 men was considered extreme. However, it is important to understand this episode in the context of Byzantine military and political practices. Blinding was not uncommon as a political punishment in Byzantium. It was frequently applied to political rivals and pretenders to the throne as a merciful alternative to execution. The rationale was to incapacitate the enemy without killing them, thus avoiding the unnecessary shedding of Christian blood. What makes Kleidion's case exceptional is its scale. While political blinding was usually limited to a few important individuals, Basil applied this punishment to an entire army. It was an act of deliberate psychological terror, intended not only to neutralize the captured soldiers but to break the morale of the entire Bulgarian nation. In this respect, it was terrifyingly effective. The impact was so profound that it caused the death of Tsar Basil himself. After his victory over the Bulgarians, he reigned for 11 more years, dying in 1025 at the age of 68. His conquest of Bulgaria represented the height of medieval Byzantine power and the beginning of a brief revival for the empire. Ironically, after his death, many of the generals he had trained were marginalized, and his military reforms were partially abandoned, leading to a new period of decline that would eventually culminate in the loss of those same territories. Samuel's memory, on the other hand, survived as a symbol of resilience and national identity. For modern Bulgarians and Macedonians, he represents a culture hero, one of the last great figures of the early Bulgarian Empire, which held out against all odds against the dominant power of its time. In 1969, Samuel's mortal remains were discovered by Greek archaeologist Nikolaos Moutopoulos in the Church of St. Achilles on an island in Lake Prespa. Ironically, this was a church that Samuel himself had built to house the saint's relics. A forensic facial reconstruction revealed the Tsar's appearance as a bald, angular-faced man with a white beard and mustache. The rivalry between Samuel and Basil II continues to generate historiographical controversy to this day. Bulgarian and Macedonian historians tend to portray Samuel as a legitimate defender of independence against Byzantine imperial aggression. Greek historiography traditionally follows the Byzantine narrative, viewing Basil as a legitimate emperor, restoring control over rebellious territories. These conflicting interpretations reflect modern geopolitical tensions in the Balkan region, where ancient history is frequently used to justify contemporary national claims. An often neglected aspect of this history is the fate of the blinded soldiers. What happened to these 14,000 men after their harrowing journey back to Bulgaria? Historical records are silent on this point, but the socioeconomic impact must have been immense. In a medieval agrarian society, blindness represented not only devastating personal trauma, but also the inability to work and support families. Thousands of men of productive age, trained veterans, were suddenly transformed into dependents. In an age without welfare systems, the burden of caring for these disabled veterans must have fallen on their families and communities, further compounding the effects of military defeat. The blinding of the Bulgarian soldiers by Basil I forces us to confront the reality of medieval warfare in all its brutality. Unlike romanticized depictions of medieval chivalry, warfare in the 10th century Balkans was characterized by calculated violence and deliberate psychological terror. Basil's actions were not a momentary departure from civility, but a coldly planned tactic to achieve strategic goals through terror. At the same time, Samuel's stubborn resistance against a far more powerful enemy remains a testament to human resilience. For decades, he kept the dream of Bulgarian independence alive against all odds, using cunning and determination to compensate for his disadvantage in resources. That he died not from physical wounds but from the shock of seeing his men suffering speaks to an emotional connection with his soldiers rarely seen in medieval rulers. More than 1,000 years later, the Velasa Mountains still hold the memories of that fateful day in July 2014, when an army was routed and a particularly cruel method of psychological warfare changed the course of southeastern European history. The consequences of that day reverberated through the centuries, shaping borders, national identities, and collective memories. In Basil's calculated cruelty and Samuel's determined resilience, we see reflected the complexities of human nature, our capacity for both extreme brutality and courage in the face of overwhelming adversity. The Vulgarakthos and his adversary are long gone, but the story of their final confrontation and of the 14,000 soldiers who paid a terrible price continues to remind us of the human costs of power and ambition, and the shadows that war casts, even 1,000 years after the cries have fallen silent in the mountains.